Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Family and Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, held today, Thursday, the 7th of December, 2023. You have your agenda packs in front of you. Can I start, first of all, by taking any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, I've received apologies from Councillors Fairless, Aitken and Waddle.
Thank you, that's noted. We also have within your agenda pack the minutes from the previous meeting in November. They are contained pages 1 to 6. Can I just ask if there are any issues on those minutes relating to accuracy of those minutes? I'm not seeing any indication of anyone wanting to speak, so on that basis, I will sign those off as an accurate record. We now move on to the standard item, which is the disclosure of members' interests. We all have our public interests declared on the council website. Are there any interests over and above what you've already declared which relate to the report this morning, the annual report? And again, I'm not seeing anyone indicating anything to that effect. So then we move into the substantive item this morning, which for your agenda packs is page 7 to 28, which is the Education, Send and Skills Annual Report 2022 to 2023, and that's going to be taken this morning by David Street. So, David, over to you. There we go.
Slight false start. Good morning, everybody. Really pleased to be able to bring this report to Fact Scrutiny Committee, and I look forward to your comments and questions. The report in itself, I think, is relatively straightforward, but what I would like to do during my time now is just to go through some of the actual details within the report, just pull out some highlights, if that's okay. So what I'm be talking through really is in your agenda pack, I think pages 22 onwards, which is the actual physical report itself. The report is written slightly differently this year to how it has been in the past. Education, Send and Skills have 6 key priorities. In years past we had up to 12, it's refined down to 6 for currently, and these were, to all intents and purposes, the key elements of our work throughout the period of this report, and as a result I think it probably is appropriate that this report is written through each key priority. So the attempt is to summarise the work that's been undertaken within each key priority, and to also the actions, the outcomes of those actions, and also a number of the priorities also have some next steps as well, which you would expect, as most of these elements are ongoing development areas. The 6 priorities are listed on page 22 of your pack, page 2 and 3 of the actual physical report. Moved on to page 23, we've got a little overview of the landscape for education across Northumberland. It is very varied. We obviously, you know that, and we know the county well, with both significant rural areas and also urban conurbations. But within those, we have every type of school and educational setting. And I think the quote there, Henry Ford at the bottom, is a key element for us in Northumberland, in that, you know, the delivery of high quality education is a joint responsibility of us working together. Council, including education, health, social care, all have an input. And also at the front line, obviously most importantly, all the providers, schools, the early years settings, and actually we only get any or we can only maximise our degree of success and maximise our ability to overcome challenges when we are working truly together and sharing our joint responsibilities, both statutory responsibilities and our moral responsibilities also. I'll go through each of the key priorities in turn then, if that's okay, and then obviously would welcome questions at the end. Key priority 1 is a little bit of a catch-all really, in terms of us just recognising that we need to know ourselves well, and that's internal services within the local authority, but more importantly the schools and the settings need to know themselves well also, and actually a large amount of our work is in, yes, supporting quality, but also recognising where schools are at currently and the challenges that are approaching them in the distance also. And actually one key element of this key priority is reporting performance to the council and the community, and I suppose today is a perfect example of that taking place. The scrutiny of this report is helping to meet that key priority. On page 23, I have summarised a couple of points that I've picked from the other priorities, as this is a cover-all. And I'll cover most of them in turn in the individual priorities going forward, to the more key and focused ones. So on to page 24 of your pack, it's key priority 2. Challenge and support the improvement in the performance of our schools and settings so that all children and young people, including disadvantaged and SEND learners, achieve the best educational outcomes. This is the key school improvement outcome. The key lead, I suppose, in and around the meeting of this priority is Dave Cookson and his associated teams. It does cover the full age range of learners, early years right the way through to Key Stage 5. There is some significant detail in this area that was delivered to FACS, which was the School Improvement Annual Report, and a cross-reference to there, you'll see obviously lots of similarities. If I just start with early years, I think it is a real strength in Northumberland and has been for the last 5 years or so. Prior to that, it was a development area, and we were finding that our early years outcomes were not as strong as national averages. I think it probably was 4 years ago where we actually started to surpass the national average for our outcomes at the end of early years. And we've maintained that position since that point. The quality of early years provision has been very strong for a significant length of time, and that's continued through 22-23. 97% of our early years providers are rated good or outstanding. That is a significant achievement and is above the national average. One of our key performance indicators is around the take-up of 2-year-old provision. 2-year-old provision currently, though it is changing, and I'll mention that a little bit later, 2-year-old provision is for disadvantaged learners who are eligible for 15 hours of 2-year-old provision. Over time, that our uptake has been significantly above the national average. In summer term just gone, we were at 82%. It has been higher than that. In the autumn and spring terms, we were at in the 90s. But we are consistently above the national average. And when we were at 96% in the first term, we were looking at being in the top 3 local authorities in the country for 2-year-old take-up. And I think in terms of one of the council core priorities, the best start in life, clearly that is a key element within best start in life. There are some challenges in the early years sector, and we have recognised there's been some closures of some of the early years settings across 22-23. Those closures generally related to business challenges, though we do have an element of the council that support with business support for early years providers. There were some settings which were struggling to make ends meet, and as a result, they did lead to some closures. Some of those were also related to key staff retiring, and being generally small organisations, the organisations themselves sort of struggled with that in terms of recruiting as high a quality as they would wish to do so. Having said that, though, that will have led to some changes of settings and some upset, no doubt, for some parents and families. Every learner was found a new setting within relatively short period of time. And we continue to meet one of our key statutory responsibilities, which is ensuring there is sufficiency of early years provision and childcare across Northumberland. When there is a blip, we do deal with it well and ensure that families get the provision they need as swiftly as humanly possible. It is a success story, I think, in that area. Moving on to academic outcomes, and I'm going to summarise generally here, as I said, the school improvement report goes into much more detail than here, but the summary is that Northumberland continues to bounce back following the pandemic. We are almost back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of academic outcomes. That is a significant achievement. The country as a whole has struggled to return to pre-pandemic, but actually in the northeast, the 13 local authorities across the northeast have all significantly struggled to return to pre-pandemic academic outcomes. We are obviously aware of some details within the outcomes. We know that we need to though we've had some continued successes in terms of, say, of reading and writing at Key Stage 2. We also know that maths was not in line with where we would have wanted it to be, and there are some significant school improvement steps being taken to continue our development with maths. But again, that's just almost an anecdote in the story, which is that we are bouncing back to pre-pandemic levels, though that is not without its challenges. Same message across Key Stage 4, our Progress 8 and Attainment 8. We are in and around the national averages, but generally better than the North East average. But again, we also recognise that there is certainly work to be done to improve those figures further. We have no lack of ambition for the young people in Northumberland, and we do believe that they should be achieving well above national averages, and that will continue to be our target and our focus going forwards. And all the schools and settings absolutely share that desire. Just on a finished note, really, for priority 2, the inspection outcomes for last year are listed or recorded there. 53 inspections in Northumberland. That's a fairly typical number. We normally get high 40s to low 60s within any one year. But of those 53, 50 schools were judged to be either to remain or to move to good or outstanding. And we had 1 school improve its grade, 2 requires improvement, and 2 schools moved to grades below good. Obviously, I think it's important to look at the ratios there in terms of the significant successes that are occurring within Ofsted inspections across our schools in Northumberland, and I've already mentioned them for our early years settings as well. But also to note, and particularly linking to key priority 1 of knowing our schools well, the 2 schools who moved to grades below good, we knew that was going to happen. The school themselves knew that was going to happen, and were already on that recovery journey at the time of the inspection was taken. And we just do need to recognise that, like all organisations, schools, there is a little bit of a roller coaster from time to time, and some challenges can sometimes have a stronger impact on one school other than another. But I think overall, we're looking at a very strong position. We do have the highest percentage of schools that are good or outstanding in Northumberland that, to the best of my knowledge, we've ever had. And we are above national averages for that. And also the percentage of learners that attend, because I recognise that was a question asked by this committee in times past in terms of if it was all of our small schools that were doing well and our larger schools not doing so well, then that would be reflective in the percentage of learners who were attending a good school. But we're currently at 95% for the percentage of learners attending a good school. I'm not going to mention the school, but I am going to note my absolute joy in one of our larger primary schools moving from requires improvement to good. within this term now, so it's not within this report, but it does knock that percentage up significantly because we were looking at a high proportion of learners there. Okay. Key figures on page 26, again, still just as a summary to key priority 3, we are looking at increases pretty much across the board for those figures, and increases in growth is actually going to be one of the themes, I think, in the continuation of this record and report. If we look at key priority 3, we are looking at special educational needs, working in partnership with all stakeholders, including championing the voice of children, young people and their families, jointly working with health and social care to fully implement the local area 0 to 25 SEND strategy. We have a strong SEND strategy. It's being reviewed as we speak, but it was in its second year of operation for 22-23 where this report is focused in. It is ably led and coordinated by Sam Barron as the key lead, and also supported by Mike Finlay. 2 sections really in terms of looking at the strategy overall and how we interact with our partners, particularly health but social care also, in order to deliver for learners with special educational needs, and that schools, settings, college are all working side by side with health in order to again, meet need as swiftly as possible. And then the second section is about a fully inclusive education system. So that's looking at all learners with SEND, whether they're higher needs or if they're learners at SEND support. We are seeing significant growth in the number of learners in Northumberland with special educational needs of one type or another. Particular growth areas are learners with social, emotional and mental health needs, and also learners with ASD, with autistic traits and elements to their learning pathway. This is a reflection of the national picture. It's not special to Northumberland, and it is certainly a reflection across the North East also. And these are key challenges across the North East. My peers in other local authorities, this is top priority and continues, to be honest, to be a top priority for myself and my team. Just the figures there regarding the number of EHC plans. You know, the last 4 years has seen a 72% growth. And central services and schools were working very hard in 2020, by the way. It wasn't that there was a ton of resources that were spare at that point in time. And yet, on the back of that growth, there has been some growth in funding, which has supported, but there also can be some gaps. I've noted some comments in there that are not necessarily personal comments from the Director of Education or particular council comments, which might be a bit odd to put in a council report, but those are some of the views of schools and settings. And I suppose in light of our partnership and trying to hear the voice of schools and settings in our partnership, particularly in SEND, but right across the board, I thought it was valuable to put the deliverers of the services views within, obviously, the report. It's a no-brainer when you put it like that, possibly. But those comments there, some of which we may agree with completely and some which we may not, but those are beliefs that are out there within the sector. And I would summarise a little bit of this element in saying about how many very inclusive schools and settings we have in Northumberland, who are completely bought into the need to deliver on a fully inclusive education system. They also recognise the challenges in doing that, and that might be a change for some schools in what they've been delivering before. But schools recognising this is my local community, my job is to deliver for my local community, for those residents and young people, and actually, whatever those needs are that young person has, it is our job to meet those needs. And to work with as many partners as possible in order to do so when they are particularly challenging or just challenging to deliver. That doesn't mean that schools are not desperate to deliver in those areas. And we've got, I could list multiple areas of success in that area. One thing that you might have recognised or might have seen in the press or might have recognised through working with your own constituents is that there's an increase in some legitimate parental demand. I'm not saying this is a negative thing, in parental demand, and an increase possibly in communications with yourselves when things maybe aren't as immediate or immediately in line as a parent would wish and should be able to access, I'll be absolutely honest. But I think that is a reflection in the increase of the overall numbers. So there are more happy SEND learners and SEND families in Northumberland than ever before because of the increase in the numbers and our provision, but there will also be a proportionate increase in those that are not as happy. But again, we're working exceptionally hard to ensure that anybody that's got a query or a complaint has that met legitimately as swiftly as possible. Page 28 of your report, page 14 and 15 of the annual report, just highlights some details there in terms of actions and impact. And really, I'm not going to go through each one, but I think the theme for this page continues to be that theme of growth. So all of the central teams are meeting more learners, more schools, more parents than ever before. Significant and substantial increases. A number of the teams have had to really look at the way they were delivering prior to that and delivering different models to again meet that need, but in a more efficient and effective way. Growth and interaction with parents is significant. Our interaction and working with the Parent Carer Forum again is significant and instrumental actually in some of the changes that we've made to improve services. The training programme has been massively extended over a number of years actually, but really significantly so last year. And in particular, we had a number of conferences, Senko, Inclusion Conference, Relationship Matters Conference, really key in themselves, not, there's no silver bullet here, but as a trio of getting national speakers and local speakers who are achieving really well in this in the SEND arena, and the attendance, over 150 delegates to each of those. So particularly the last one, the Inclusion Conference, we had every key school in Northumberland represented at that conference, and it has led directly to that building of the inclusive culture that I'm sure we'd all want to see, but also know and recognise it is difficult to deliver perfectly from day one. Okay, I'm sure there'll be some questions for that key priority. I'll keep moving on if that's okay. Key priority 4, we're looking at our post-16 provision to all intents and purposes. So it's developing the vocational education offer to provide clear pathways into apprenticeships, further education, higher education, employment for all our young people and adults. This is another story of growth. We have our own skills service who are delivering across Northumberland within this arena, within the post-16 arena. We have had some significant success in some particular niche areas, but actually we're getting to have a much fuller and broader offer, say in the post-16 arena. The numbers of young people and adults actually engaged with the service is significantly growing, and the outcomes for those young people and adults are also significantly growing in terms of our achievement rates, the attendance and completion rates, and particularly in and around areas, for example, learners that need to resit their GCSE English and Mathematics qualifications. Again, the results for those through 22-23 were significantly higher in previous years. And I do need to sort of, it would be appropriate, I think, to name check Mick Burton and Neil Dorwood as the key leads in this area, and also their teams across the board. I'll drop another anecdotal into, which actually happened during the summer holidays. This was regarding a proportion, some SEND learners who were going to a private provider actually for their post-16 education. We went to monitor that provider to ensure that they were well prepared for this increase in their intake, and they weren't ready as it happened. And so we did need to call upon our skills service, who are already delivering a SEND offer in Alnwick, Morpeth and in Prudhoe as well, to extend their offer to this additional 20 learners. The service leapt to it, contacted the parents, met the young people within about a 3-day period, and many of those learners were enrolled into skills courses which both met their need and also their aspirations for the future. If you see the survey results at the bottom of page 17, you know that's an independent survey of the learners that have been involved in courses across skills in 22-23, and you'll see those percentages are high, but we also work further to ensure that we can get them higher still throughout 23-24. Page 30 of your report, or 18-19 of the Education Skills Report, just demonstrates some of the physical developments that have been ongoing, and I think we've mentioned them before with this committee, but these are significant developments which are, if you get the opportunity to see any of these facilities, you will see that these are world-leading facilities. The technology and the setup and the ability of the training, the capability of the training that's available is really exceptional, and skills look to further grow their footprint in order to support residents in achieving their aspirations. Key priority 5, moving on to page 31, is the development of appropriate high-quality education provision that meets the needs of all children and young people as close to their home communities as possible. Again, I suppose this is an echo to a comment I made earlier about schools really recognising meeting the need of their residents. We are a large local authority, a large county, as you all know, and we have some challenges that maybe some of our urban local neighbours don't have in terms of travel to get to the right facilities, but to underpin that, hence the responsibility for this key priority. There's been a number of developments that are listed there, some of them on a partnership basis, some of them more specifically related to special educational needs, that we continue to need to develop our provision. And throughout the year, there's been the ongoing planning for the Seaton Valley Partnership and the rebuilding of Astley High School and Wittrig Middle School, the reorganisation within the COCUP Partnership, which is ongoing, and also the reorganisation within the Berwick Partnership, all of which are key elements in attempting to meet needs of children and young people as close to their home communities as possible. Happy to take any specific questions on those later. As I say, there's a list of the specific work that's been ongoing. And then finally, I'm turning to key priority 6, which is ensuring the Education Send and Skills Service fulfils its statutory duties within all the legislative framework, and there are many legislative frameworks which are linked to Education Send and Skills, but I'll just highlight some of the elements for there. From an admissions perspective, we continue to have high proportions of young people and families gaining the school place of their first choice. The primary first choice allocations is 6% above the national average, and the secondary is 13% above the national average. That doesn't mean that there's not disappointment for that 4.5%, and we're acutely aware of that. We're not, in no way is admissions resting on its laurels, but back to the first comment and about this is in partnerships with schools, settings, academies, in order to work collectively with them to ensure that their admissions procedures are appropriate and meet the needs of their local communities, and we're both directing and influencing those as much as humanly possible. A little bit of a jump, but through to inclusion. We have a responsibility to ensure that any learners that are unfortunately excluded from school do still receive a full-time and appropriate education. I would highlight that though there are certainly some successes in terms of the number of learners that we're successfully meeting the need for, and more than before, I also would want to recognise that this is an area of growth and is a significant challenge across Northumberland. We do have some excellent private and independent alternative providers, and they do a really good job where those settings are deemed to be appropriate for the young people involved. We also have our own pupil referral unit, which again has developed significantly throughout this year and continues to offer some really high quality academic performance and drive to ensure that the young people involved there still continue to have their life chances and aspirations met, or able to be met. But again, it is an area of continued pressure, and though there is lots of good work going on, there have been times where those challenges have meant that we maybe haven't met what we'd like to have met as quickly as humanly possible. Again, we remain on that. I'm happy to take specific questions for later. Try not to miss anybody out necessarily, just in this feedback, but school finance fits within one of our statutory responsibilities and our work alongside the schools forum. We're currently in a position where the funding model for all schools in Northumberland now matches the national, mirrors, I think is the technical phrase, but completely mirrors the national funding formula recommendations from the DFE. It's taken a number of years to move towards that position, but we're in it now, and I think that's really appropriate, actually. And just a mention on school balances, in that though in some early 3 years ago and 2 years ago, we did see an overall growth in school balances. That doesn't mean a growth for all schools and all of their balances, of course. This is the balance picture across Northumberland. But actually, in the financial year that ended April 23, we did see that there was a fall in overall balances, indicating, I suppose, a high degree of spend, and that might be totally appropriate within balances that schools have going forwards. But there has also been an increase in the number of schools in Northumberland for whom they are starting to report on deficit positions. It's still not lots, but there is growth there, and it is something that we need to keep our eye on going forwards. Educational Welfare Service have taken on some significant additional responsibilities this year, and throughout last year they were working towards, we did have a service level agreement with schools, which hopefully didn't through the way it was managed, but possibly on paper could have looked like there was like two-tier delivery for learners, which we didn't think was appropriate. So from this year, and we worked towards it throughout last year as well, the Educational Welfare Service is a free service to all schools, and therefore ensuring an equality of offer across Northumberland. I think we had it pretty much anyway, but it's insured now, I suppose, is the point I'm trying to make. And then just last comment for Virtual School, which is our service which particularly supports cared for children across Northumberland. We've got some outcomes there, but also note that there is a full report on the Virtual School in the work programme, and I think we can look forward to really drilling into the work of the Virtual School at that point. The last page is looking to the future, I suppose. Next steps. It might seem, I tried to keep this really simple and straightforward. I could have written in a more complex way, but I don't want to just wanted to make it really clear, though some of these challenges or some of the elements that are here are significant. So the first one really is around the sufficiency of early years provision. So you'll know that there is going to be a significant increase in the entitlement from 9 months old, actually, nationally. Across the next 18 months, those programmes will come onto stream. We are probably looking at needing hundreds more early years providers than are currently employed in the sector. That will be a challenge to recruit the numbers that we need. We have a very accurate mapping process already in place. We know where we need the people, we know where we need the provisions, we need to deliver on that. So that work will be a key foci going forwards. We have the continuing growth in SEND. We need to ensure that it's well managed and needs are met. There will be some challenges going forwards in terms of the high needs block, which is the key element of funding which is provided to support learners with special educational needs to Northumberland, and we're currently in consultation with schools to look at how that cake is best sliced, and Schools Forum will be coming forward with recommendations on that early in the new year. We do need to revisit our disadvantaged provision, though there are many learners who have significant successes through the education system in Northumberland. If there is a group for whom their outcomes collectively, individually some of them do exceptionally well, but collectively don't do as well as their peers, it is that disadvantaged group. And I think, though it's always been a key element of our work, I really think that we need to really sharpen our lens on that. And that's also supported by the corporate plan from the whole council, of course, for which inequalities is a key driver. A little bit further into Key Stage 4, and it's linked to there's two little arrows, is about our alternative curriculum pathways for some of our Key Stage learners, not for all, but for some of our Key Stage learners, to ensure that those learners gain strong outcomes that are appropriate for their needs and aspirations. We continue to work with preparation for adulthood for all learners. You know, we should look to see the true outcome is about young people moving into employment and or further training and education, which is to meet both their aspirations, the needs of Northumberland as a whole, and their capabilities, of course. And so our preparation for adult for all learners to ensure that learners get onto the path that is right for them, and that we maintain and support them in staying steady on that path. A link there to post-16 offer, and I don't know, I'm not sure if it was great necessary to have this as the last bullet point, but it refers back into the early years challenges we've got going forwards. There is a story of growth in lots of areas throughout this report, and in order to meet those demands, yes, we need to work efficiently and effectively and not waste a minute in any area, but we also will need absolutely the right skilled and qualified staff, and to retain those highly skilled and qualified staff. We have many of them now, we will need many more, and schools need them as well, and therefore it will remain a key focus for us into 24-25. I'm happy to take questions on my possibly rather lengthy summary. But there we go.
Just about to say that was a very comprehensive summary you did there, David. So thank you very much for that. Before I open this up to questions, what I'm going to do is bring Guy Renner-Thompson in, whose title is Cabinet Member for Inspiring Young People. I'd forgotten it had changed. So Guy, I'll bring you in, and then I'm going to start taking questions from members.
I inspire the youth of today. It's the tagline that I quite like. But so no, I mean, I'm incredibly proud. You shut up. I'm incredibly proud of this report, as I am every year, and it's what a privilege it is for me to be able to present this report. I'll be presenting this report at Cabinet on Tuesday for consideration and sign off. And it's a privilege to be able to work alongside David and the team who've come up with the numbers we have in the report, the absolutely fantastic numbers we have around our attainment, our Ofsted. The list goes on and on. David's given a very clear summary of what they are. And my role in this is to sort of give the team a laser-like focus on what we want as an administration. You know, we're not setting out to reinvent the wheel. We just need to improve on what we've got, and we're doing that, and that's going to continue into the next over the next few years till we're at the very top. I mean, we often talk about regional comparisons. I'm not interested in regional comparisons per se. I like to look at us at the national picture, and the aim is to get Northumberland one of the best serving skills services in the country, rather than just going, oh, we're a bit better than Newcastle, that'll do. You know, we want to be better than everyone else, and we're getting there. If I can link this back to the corporate plan that the administration sets, the first priority is tackling inequalities. The second priority is economic growth. To me, they're exactly the same thing. The way we improve inequalities is by getting people into well-paid work. We get people into well-paid work by improving our educational offer and improving our training post-16 and post-18, so we can get people into well-paid employment. There's nothing more important that the local authority can do, in my eyes, to improve people's lives in that way. The third priority for the corporate plan is value for money, and I think David and the team are incredibly good value for money. It's worth every pound of his salary. You know, you can't put a price on the future of the children, but we do it for a very economic amount of money. As a department, we squeeze every last penny out, and we do it incredibly well. We work well with our partners across the north of Tyne. Audrey and I have gone to the meetings with the north of Tyne to come up with the education and skills strategy there. We work with them, especially within Northumberland Skills. We have joint partnerships with them in Port of Blythe and our industrial centres. And that's something that we're looking to take forward as we move into the North East Combined Authority. Audrey and I have already had meetings with them, and they recognise that Northumberland is a leading figure in the region to do with education and skills. They're looking at us, that we've got the spotlight on us, so we just need to keep talking up our positive attributes, and hopefully the rest of the region and the country can learn a thing or two from what we're doing here.
Thank you for that, Guy. So, we're being asked to do a number of things at Scrutiny this morning, which are indicated. There are 4 key items: scrutinise the report, provide comment and challenge, and look forward for future planning. So, I have 5 speakers who've indicated to speak, and they are in this order. Councillor Ball, Councillor Watson, Paul Rickard, Mr Hodgson, and then Angie Scott. So, Caroline Ball, please, if I can take you first.
Thank you, Chair, and can I just say how inspired I am right now. Thank you, Guy. So, the report itself, great report. I just do have some concerns. When we're mentioning about staffing pressures, I believe that some schools and teachers are now having to do some of the assessments, which may be part of going forward. I'm just worried about teachers and teaching assistants having to do more and more with less and less resources, time and everything else, which then will put a strain on more people, will leave the profession long term. So it's going to then add to that whole wheel. So I'm just a little bit concerned about the staffing pressures. I have a massive concern about the private sector in education. We have seen some companies nationally and locally move out of the sector because it's not financially viable, which then has an impact on children and young people in this area. And I just do have concerns if we are relying more and more on the private sector, right the way from 2-year-olds till people leave education, if we're putting pound, shilling and pence before actually them learners' outcomes. And it does then in turn have an impact. Some things may not be the statutory responsibility, but I think we do need to make sure that things, if we can keep them in-house, because long-term we've seen it in other areas in the council where it ends up costing us 5 times as much in the long term because we haven't brought it back in-house. The employment pathways, some of the things that we offer are short-term, and actually what how many people then go on to paid work? Because it's all well and good putting people on short-term little courses here, but if it doesn't lead to actually going into real employment, real paid work, and not just more voluntary work, I'm not saying there's no point to it, because there's always a reason to do it, but actually we need to make sure then people then go on to get paid work, and it's all about the esteem and that long-term outcomes for people. Then when you mentioned about the nursery provision and from 2, and how there has been concern raised nationally about lowering of standards of ratios and things like that within the setting. Or what is our policy within NCC with that? Because if we are going to lower the number of staff needed, or the education of people that's working with our young people, where is our bar set? Because ultimately we could end up with more problems long term. And then one other issue that I'd like to raise is around the tackling of issues for the barriers of people that's already in the setting. Is because women especially are disproportionately affected and unable to be able to go on and do a BA, or go on and raise their aspirations. And a lot of the time, the parents that are at home, it is the women that do end up having their career choices limited as well. And traditionally, it is women that work within the childcare setting and health and social care setting. So what we're trying to do to help women get back in the workplace, raise up through the workplace as well. And I think that's it.
There's a number of questions there.
All of them now.
Which David, I know, has duly written down. So it might just be helpful as well when you're asking a question, if you indicate whether you're directing that to David, or if you want Guy to respond to a particular point as well. But David, if you're happy to run through those points, please.
Absolutely share the desire, the absolute imperative need to support schools and settings and the staff with their workload and welfare. My directors' briefings over the last 4 terms, have all had workload and welfare. Some of them have been specifically about workload and welfare. And we've shared, I've worked with and gathered the thoughts and solutions, I suppose, from a number of staff at all levels across Northumberland. And we have, again, produced some documents and some guidelines, and have specifically emphasised that with school leaders, both to look after themselves, but because they often would advocate things to their own staff, but not follow the same procedures themselves, in order to minimise that. I'm not aware of any changes in administrative procedures that are local authority or SEND based, which have significantly added to workloads. We have changed some of the procedures and some of the paperwork to do the opposite, to actually reduce some of the workload and to clarify and shorten paperwork and so on. So if there were any specific cases that you're aware of, I'd be more than happy to pick that up. And because we know there's more work to do in that area, but it couldn't be any higher, I don't think, on our priority list. The second comment you made, I think, talking about the private sector. Now, I'll do it from two perspectives, but from an early years perspective, we have always had, I think, a really successful and strong working relationship between local authority, schools that are providing early years provision, and our PVIs, our private, voluntary and independent sector. Now, though we do have some of our PVIs are nationally based organisations, which have a lot of, I suppose, a lot of backup and so on and so forth, and they generally are delivering really high quality. The amount that they get paid is fixed. We will be working on we are working on the rates right now, and Schools Forum will be making recommendation about the hourly rates for different ages of learners, and also we also have a early years pupil premium and also a disadvantaged supplement as well. So just in calculating how that's going to look. So it doesn't matter whether they're a pure private sector with you know, a massive national organisation. What they get in Northumberland is what everybody gets in Northumberland. So there is a level playing field there. Having said that, most of the private, voluntary, independent sectors, the highest numbers actually of individual organisations is childminders. I think we've got something like 274 of them, and these are literally small businesses. Now, they don't have the backup and support that the bigger chain nurseries might have, but they still do an excellent job. And what they do have is direct business support from the local authority early years team. And we need to work with those small businesses. They're generally in it for all the best moral purposes. And so, like I said, they're probably the highest sector of our private providers are very small businesses. We need to support them with both their quality and their business and financial management. And they do generally work really, really well with the schools. So we've got 108 schools that deliver early years provision. But often there'll be a young person could be at school in the morning and then gets picked up by the childminder in the afternoon or after school. And all those relationships are generally very strong in Northumberland. Sometimes, often because they're also sometimes looking at the same business actually, but still work well together in the best interest of the child. In terms of special educational needs in the private sector, the general message is that over time and continuing through 22-23, our use of private provision was reduced. We, for obvious reasons or relative reasons, we wanted Northumberland school children, those that were leaving us to go to an out-of-county placement, that transport time probably wasn't as appropriate as we want it to be. So we've developed further provision with inside Northumberland and with some of our special schools so that travel doesn't have to take place. It's actually one area of the high needs blocks that's gone down in terms of overall spend. But at the same time, there are some really good private providers. The ones that we know provide and do an exceptional job, we will want to work with more because we know they're delivering for Northumberland residents. When there's worries from another direction, whether it's early years, SEND or any other exception that you can mention with me, we can take steps, work with parents to provide other provisions. Now then, where are we? People moving from skills into paid work. The title for the skills service is actually skills and employability. And employability in particular is working with people who might have been employed for a period of time, and that's of all ages actually, some young and some a little bit older. And our success with our employability programs is strong. So we are seeing, hundreds of people returning to full-time, long-term work on the back of our employability figures. I haven't got them immediately to hand, but I will share them with you if that's okay. Another question was about ratios and national questions in terms of one of the ways that you're correct, one of the ways in which the government attempted to make, or it could be deemed that the government was attempting to make childcare more sustainable and affordable, was by increasing the ratios, say for 2-year-olds, from 4:1 to 5:1. I can't say this is happening every second of every day, but the general feedback from Northumberland provision is that we've not moved to the higher ratios. I couldn't tell you that at one particular point, one particular day, there might not be a higher ratio whilst one member of staff's moving or what have you. But generally speaking, our providers have gone no, which again is a plus for them in terms of private organisations. That they're sticking to the quality. The other balance point that did come out through 22-23 and will continue this year is that the actual rates and the hourly rates for the children are all going to be increasing. Getting to a position where actually a provision with 2-year-olds is going to bring in a good proportion of money and more than before in order to support that high quality and keep the ratios as low as possible. And then the last pointer, I think you're talking about some of the barriers for women in terms of trying to develop with their careers. We are, I'll refer it back to early years, but it probably needs to be extended beyond that. Clearly, everybody in the service would want to see any barriers diminished and also support available to those that face specific barriers. We are launching, or I think literally the start of this week, some campaigns for to seek more staff, and the element of that campaign is about careers. It's not about shorter term work or not about short term contracts. It's about looking at attracting people into the education sector to work with a view to being in the education sector, bringing their skills and talents to the education sector, and being supported to gain and stay in that sector with an appropriate rate of pay, appropriate work-life balance, appropriate welfare at work, to ensure that everybody can continue to meet their needs of their home lives, which is super important, but also get that both the financial and the other benefits we get from full-time, worthwhile, significant work that's making a difference in Northumberland. But I would agree, it is definitely something we need to keep a firm eye on, and again, happy to work with anybody that's aware of programmes and procedures that minimise those barriers.
Thank you, David. Got value for money with those sets of questions there. So I'll take the next two, Anna Watson, then Paul Rickard.
Yeah, never go behind Caroline because she kind of steals your thunder, doesn't she?
I know that next time I'll ask her last.
So it is along the same lines of what Caroline's kind of asked, but the private, voluntary and independent settings is a real concern for me, in the fact that you talked about the business challenges for those settings and the business support, but obviously a number of them, that business support and those challenges were too great. So I guess I want to know, what does it look like for those families that you've managed to find alternative provisions? Is that in particular areas that's been more difficult to find? Really, what is the resilience in that setting? Because we know from what Guy's aspirations are with the economy, and it massively impacts on the economy if that parent then has to give up work because you found them an alternative provision, but that simply just doesn't work and fit in with their work hours. So how close are we to not being able to find alternative provision, and how close are we to crisis point? Thank you.
Okay, for the answer for this report for 22-23 is that there was sufficient childcare, and sufficient is about meeting the needs of parents in a really, really high proportion. So though coming across my desk sometimes that there will be families, for example, when there was a setting in one part of the county that closed, and I did get a number of parents contacting me directly to say, what's happening, what we're going to get, and will that fit in with my work pattern, and I need after school here, and so on and so forth. And we both looked globally at that particular area. The early years team did their stuff, which was to develop other provisions, create space at other provisions, bring other people to the table, and we did manage to meet 99% of the needs. So I think generally speaking, to date, there have been some blips in terms of some changes, but we've been able to get in there and do the work in a 4-week period or what have you, which would be disruptive for anybody, of course it would, and for the young person in themselves in terms of maybe having to move to a new setting. That's always, it's both an excitement and possibly a challenge as well at the same time. So I think to date, pretty well, and I think going forwards, we will need that recruitment programme that I was just talking about to really come on board. And it runs right across the sector. So I've currently got, I think, 55 people engaged with our skills early years development programme, and as soon as they qualify, we will have, there will be jobs in the market for them immediately. There are others that we need to bring into the position, we will need to monitor it very, very carefully going forwards to ensure that, I think it's the new entitlements is the bit, it's the challenge. Maintaining where we are now, I think we're probably lined up ready to go. We do have a small number of small amounts of government grant for the implementation of the programme over the next 2 years. And we are working nationally, we're doing some pilot stuff as well, so that we're at the forefront of that. And we found when we extended to 30 hours, at this point of the 30 hours extension for 3 and 4 year olds, we had legitimate concerns about whether we'd be able to deliver it, but we we piloted it nationally. We got the best people we had onto it. We expanded the workforce. We worked with the providers to do that, and it worked. At that point in time, providers were worried about funding rates and so on, but on the whole, it came through and it worked. We do have that challenge now. It's why it's bullet point number 1 is to ensure the sufficiency of childcare going forward.
Thank you for that. So I'll take Paul Rickard and then Mr Hodgson.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think to echo what's been said, it's a really good report for Northumberland, isn't it? Things continue to improve. I guess a couple of concerns, which I don't think necessarily come out of the report, which would have. Local authorities, schools are facing falling rolls at the moment because of the population. And I just wonder, does that need to be covered off as a priority in terms of how that's managed moving forwards? Because budgets are decreasing everywhere. I don't know of a school that I work with where they haven't got a declining surplus or moving into deficit. And I wonder how, as a local authority, that's managed with a real hybrid of schools in terms of moving forwards. And I guess, Chair, I have to declare an interest as CEO with schools in Northumberland. And I think interesting in terms of talking about children getting first places, which is great, but is that because there are less children taking the places in terms of children actually getting the first kind of priority placement to go to? And I just think that linked to overall school finances moving forwards, everyone's feeling the squeeze, surplus places, there's lots of them. At what point does there have to be some work going back to that? And we've all been there before, but it's getting to a crisis point, I feel, in the sector of how long do we keep propping things up for. And I have to declare an interest in this one. The line of 4 schools have economised successfully in 2023 with £25,000 the costs successfully recovered to the council. I'd be intrigued to understand a little more about that, bearing in mind that no other local authority in the North East charges anything like Northumberland to economise. And I just worry that that's money that comes out of our schools.
David, are you happy to pick that up, particularly that focus around pupil role?
Yeah, in Northumberland we have schools of all shapes and sizes, and to date we have schools of all shapes and sizes who are, through no doubt significant amount of blood, sweat and tears, but do manage to balance their budget and do manage to deliver a really high quality education. It doesn't mean it's not a massive challenge. And those schools, I think that maybe we do need to continue to look at those schools that are experiencing challenges from a financial perspective. And it sounds very simple, but it won't be very simple, but almost pair them with a similar school who have managed to run things obviously in a different way and have managed to balance the books. In my experience over the last, not just for this report, but over the last 8 years, I've had to eat my hat on more than one occasion where I did think that a school who had falling roles and vacant places, the struggle going forward, I really struggled to see how they were going to manage to make ends meet and to be able to support the staff to work appropriately with an appropriate work-life balance and also deliver high quality. But we have had definitely, and some of the schools you've been directly involved in yourself, those schools and who have I don't know, risen like a phoenix from the flames, actually, to deliver very, very high quality education within the budgets that's set for them, that's allocated through the national funding formula. So it is possible. I'm not saying it's easily done, though.
I just think, Chair, coming back, one of the things that won't feature yet is a 5% rise in teachers' pensions payments, which is not yet being guaranteed to be funded at all. And any school with teachers, which they all have, that there isn't necessarily the funding beyond September to pay for that rise. It kicks in April, and that doesn't even feature yet. So I just think it is something that's going to have to be watched really carefully. Otherwise, there will be a move, even in the best schools, David, we both know it, in terms of how that's managed.
Yeah. Just before I bring Guy in, can we just pick up on that point of that 25,000 academy transfer funding issue?
Yes, it's not one that I've intricately know the details of, but my understanding is that that is to cover the legal costs that are imposed or come to the council through the academy association process. I'm also aware that schools that do academise, though there's not a lot, but those that do academise do gain some additional funding to support the academisation process. So my interpretation would be that it's not money the schools, it's not taking money from schools' budgets, it's taking money from the budget which is allocated to the school for their academisation. And therefore, whether that net nils, Paul, I don't know, and I'll be happy to hear what other local authorities are doing if they're doing so in a more school-friendly way, because that's what we want to be.
Okay, we can perhaps pick that up as a detailed response after the meeting. So, but clearly, so Guy, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, on the pupil roll number, we know this because we've been through the consultation on the Berwick schools and we've been through the consultation on the schools in the West, and that's where the concentration of schools with a lot of surplus places are. But it's been our direction from the cabinet of the council to not close rural village schools, because that would solve that problem. You would close the schools that don't have the pupils in, which are in our small rural villages. We've taken that decision to do everything we can to avoid closing them, because it really impacts on the community. And as David said, we have seen, I mean, Embleton C of E school springs to mind. That was going to close, and that was one of those ones that has come back from the ashes and now has a full school and it's doing really well, so it can be done. But we are looking at things like federations and co-heads and pooling resources in these smaller rural schools. You know, we'll do everything we can to avoid closure.
Thank you, Guy. So if we now take Mr. Hodgson, Angie Scott, and then Mark Swinburne.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the report, David. As you said, there's a lot of positives indeed. Just 4 points. First of all, just on it's the background section, 5.2 on page 9, where obviously it's the impact of the pandemic. And the last sentence is, very simply, more of our young people are struggling in education. Now, if you put a phrase like that in, can you quantify that?
I think there are a number of metrics that collectively would quantify that. So I think one of those metrics is the growth in exclusions, both on a suspension, temporary exclusion basis and also permanent exclusions. We're also seeing a higher demand for alternative provision, be that school run or be that independently delivered actually, but the school commissioning that. So for learners who are struggling to access the I suppose, traditional model of 25 to 30 in a class. So those are the metrics which would indicate that they are struggling, and also I suppose the growth that there has been in our SEND strategy, planning strategy, also does extrapolate the growth in learners with a special education need for social, emotional and mental health needs. It doesn't mean they can't access a typical school offer, but might mean that they've got more challenge in order to do so. And it's those metrics really that are driving the point.
What I'm thinking is that obviously some of them will not go on to the special needs register. In other words, you've got those students that are literally struggling, and as we've said, schools are stretched in terms of providing support. So what I'm worried about is that you've got a potentially increased number. We haven't quantified it. Is there the support to go in, and would that number increase over the coming years, which could be a problem for us as an authority down the line? In other words, in terms of going into secondary schools, the outcomes and so on. Is this something that we can't ignore? And is it part of your priorities?
Absolutely. I mean, it's key priority 3 all day and all night. And
No, in terms of going forward, your priorities for...
Yeah. The management and the growth in SEND, and by SEND I do mean both learners with a recognised DHC plan and maybe a diagnosis, and also those that SEND support. Any of the learners, as you'll know from the classroom, every class teacher is able to look at their cohort and to work out those that need that extra support. And we do need to try and make sure that they've got the skills and the knowledge to deliver that support themselves, and or to use other agencies in order to deliver some of that support where needed. I think there are some opportunities in this area in terms of growth and the fact of actually getting some of the some economies of scale actually within some of our schools. So one example would be the specialist support basis model that we've launched this year, where we've got 8 primary schools now who have developed a provision within their school which is, to all intents and purposes, specialist with a specialist teacher, and they have their pupils access that resource as they need to, both for individual curriculum development, but also so that they're well regulated and able to access the mainstream side of the curriculum as well, in a balanced way. So this is the local resident attending their local school, but receiving the support that they need to meet their potential. Again, I'm not saying this is necessarily an easy thing to do. No. But I think all schools are recognising that if previously they had a cohort and within the 10% of the learners had a special educational need, they're now looking at a position where it might be 20%. And as a result, they are reorganising their resources in order to dedicate more time to a higher proportion of the learners at the school. Some schools are doing that amazingly successfully. Others are having some challenges, and actually that, back to that first quote, they're working together and in partnership to learn from those that are providing and successfully on a day-to-day basis, and those that are having more challenge in that. And I do think that schools' doors are really open at the moment to working differently. They recognise we're going to have to do things differently. Another tiny example, I suppose, but the number of schools that don't have a behaviour policy anymore, and you go, why would a school not have a behaviour policy? That's something, but it's a relationships policy, because we're looking at working with young people with social, emotional, mental health challenges. It's not a chosen behaviour. It's about their particular needs and the triggers that give particular outputs, and a relationships policy, just as a title in itself, brings forward a set of strategies which might be different to what's been done in the past, but can be still just as effective as the strategies of the past.
Okay. So possibly could we have some figures?
I think if it is a request,
there's a real pattern emerging across the authority which would be a cause for concern if we talk about significant number of students.
So the SEND place planning strategy is the document we want to get to grips with. It's been in existence for a year and 3 months. The figures are being reviewed because it's actually it's got 5 years of predictions in there. And it's also broken down by partnership. So that's been really useful for schools to recognise what the future is. Because I think your comment on and how it's going to impact on secondaries to come, I think is a really, really valid point. And that strategy, I think, is one which unpicks that. When we reviewed the numbers just this, the start of this term, to see whether the 1 year numbers were accurate, because we started as an estimation. Actually, they were pretty accurate to what's really materialised, but we're going to refine again and to look and to move that 5 year on, so we know what's coming. But there is a challenge in ensuring that the provision is there for those learners.
Absolutely.
And just to add to your point as well, on page 25 of the report, there is some data, I think, which kind of substantiates what you're saying, because it says 22 to 23, 105 permanent exclusions,
I know.
and 5,870 suspensions, an increase of 11 and 37% respectively. And we have done some work previously as a scrutiny committee around exclusions, so I think that might be something we might want to bear in mind for a future work programme and a deep dive. But I think David's offer there, which I think you just said,
Yeah.
is around looking at what those statistics look like geographically.
Yeah.
So we can, I mean, we can probably guess where the hotspots are, but I think that would help inform things going forward. And I'm sure you're doing that anyway, but I think we will share that as a scrutiny committee to drive things forward.
Great.
So very valid question.
No, thanks.
Okay.
And just moving on there, it's interesting, you know, when you think of the change over the last 10, 15 years in Northumberland from the 3-tier to the 2-tier. And one of the drivers of that obviously was the raising of standards, because obviously the transition and so on. And yet I expect it's frustrating that we're still below national average at Key Stage 2 for maths and English. I know it's not massively below, but the fact is it is still below. And, you know, picking up Guy's point there, we want to be a nationally recognised authority, not a regional authority, and so on. Is that still a driver for the project? Because on your list of for 24, 25, it's not there. I mean, I know it's part of your priorities, but is it something that you're going to shine a light on? Because are we just going to drift along and be 2% below next year, 2% below the following year?
If we really break down the number, when you really break down the numbers, what we find is, and this is at all key stages actually across the board, is the learners that our gap between learners who are disadvantaged in the terms of their family income against non-disadvantaged, we have not closed that gap anywhere near enough, and in some case stages it's actually grown. Now, there are other elements like COVID and things like that. I'm not using that as an excuse, but just it's another influence or another factor in to try and pinpoint what it is that's happened. But that, and it is that group. If our disadvantaged learners did as well as their peers, we would be the best performing local authority in the country, full stop. And I think just that as a fact is one which shows where all the combined resources we've got and our complete partnership working needs to be focused in that point in particular, disadvantaged learners, and closing that gap.
Yeah, great. And the third point is it's really talking about apprenticeships and so on there. You know, about your key priority 4B, we will build on key relationships between education and industry. Now, up till a month ago, I was chair of governors of a school in Sunderland, and go back a year, and I was listening to Talk Sport during the World Cup. I know I'm getting around it in a roundabout way, but they were advertising nationally for apprenticeships in Nissan. And I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. Why do we need to advertise nationally for something that is an absolute, it's there on the doorstep, it's ours, it's the North East's. Surely to God, we can direct the students into those apprenticeships and do it in a proper, focused way. And I went back and we got a working party together, and the idea was that to reward, you know, the students that turn up every day, because again, you can imagine attendance in some of the areas there, but those that turned up, those that worked hard, those that got their GCSEs and so on, why not encourage them to go in and get these apprenticeships that ultimately will be secure? And then what did we see last month? The future of Nissan secured through the batteries and the electric cars and so on there. But again, my view is, why is it just Sunderland? Why can't it be Northumberland? Why can't we work collaboratively with a blue chip company like Nissan? Just because we haven't got it in Northumberland doesn't mean that we and our students shouldn't have access to those absolutely plumb apprenticeships. And there'll be other companies around North Tyneside as well that we have got to work with and find pathways for our students, because these are the jobs of the future, and they're well-paid jobs. And, you know, just what Guy was saying, if we can get these students into those sort of jobs, then the standard of living rises, it benefits the families, everything. So that is something I think that maybe we could look at and see, are there absolute pathways? Because it says, key relationships between it. Now, it's all right putting that in a sentence, but how do we get into these fantastic companies for the benefit of our students? So that was point number 3. And the final one, again, just picking up Paul's point there on the school finances, it is worrying, obviously, the future. And again, I expect it's about quantifying it. You've got, obviously, data which shows schools that are currently struggling. What is potentially the picture going into 24-25? Because, when you read through your report there, things aren't going to get any better. They're only going to get worse. So again, as a committee, have we got some sort of handle on the numbers that we're talking about of schools that potentially could be facing financial difficulties? So they're the 4 points anyway.
Okay, I'll go a little bit in reverse order if that's okay. Oh, do you want to come in? Do you want to talk about apprenticeships?
Well, I can talk about the apprenticeships bit, yeah, because Sunderland is and Nissan's a huge name. We have those big companies in Northumberland, they're just not household names, so you don't hear about it. But we have regular meetings. I've just got my list up here. Tharsis in Blyth, JDR Cables in Blyth, Egger in Hexham, Simpsons Malt in Berwick, CMP, Cramlington, Axo Nobel, Ashington. I've been there many times. So we have meetings with the leaders of those companies, and they are seeking us out for two reasons. They're saying, one, we want you to help us train the workforce we need, and two, if we're to build our businesses and encourage people to move here from abroad, we need to be able to tell our prospective employees that there are good schools in the neighbouring area, otherwise they won't come. So they're the two reasons they're coming to talk to us. But yes, they're not household names, particularly like Nissan, but we are in there with them.
David, school finance.
Yeah, there's an internal finance meeting where we review the balances of all our maintained schools, and one of the knock-ons of that monthly meeting is those schools that are struggling both now and also because there are projections for the next 3 years, how we see the picture going forwards for the next few years. And we do physically go to see those schools, speak with chairs of governors, speak with head teachers to try and really understand what the position is. Sometimes we then go on to offer or deliver on HR support in terms of restructure, where that's the way the governing body and the head teacher wish to take. Sometimes we might look at how they can increase the income in different ways, shapes or forms. For some of the schools, sometimes that's by expanding the early years provision, actually, and offering a bigger offer there has been able to support them. But all I'm saying is there is close monitoring of our maintained schools' budgets on a monthly basis. We do work directly with the head teachers and the governors in order to try and share the load and the concern that brings, to be fair, as well as looking for practical solutions that will help the school step forward.
And we also have schools forum as well.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Paul, I'll quickly bring in, because I
Sorry,
need to
Chair,
bring in
just very
two
quickly,
members.
I'll be really interested, David, to know what percentage of schools have had to use that carry forward surplus to set a balanced budget this year. I would hazard a guess it's at least 80% of your schools. I would love to be wrong. I really would love to be wrong. But at the minute, looking across 9 other local authorities in the North East that we work with, I've not come across a school yet this year that's balancing in year.
Perhaps if we can pick that up, because that sounds like
There's certainly our schools that are balancing in year in Northumberland, definitely. That doesn't mean it's not a challenging scenario, but we can relatively easily find that figure for you.
Okay, so I'm going to move progress with Angie Scott, then Mark Swinburne. But just to pick up one point about the employers as well, there is actually a Northumberland Employers Forum, which meets regularly, and Northumbria NHS, it's private sector, public sector meets, and it's HR people, and they all talk about linking in with education about future pathways of employment. So there is a lot of work being done in this sector, and it's not just all Nissan. So there's lots of really, really good stuff. So.
I'm just being selfish in the sense that why should it just be Sunderland? You know,
I can't possibly comment about Sunderland, but just wait till the match comes up. Right, okay, so Angie and then Mark Swinburne.
Thank you, Chair. So I feel that inclusive education is an expectation from this council. I believe first schools, particularly in my area, are doing really well of supporting those with special educational needs by creating sensory rooms and breakout rooms from cupboards. My concern is that these schools aren't staffed adequately with skilled members of staff who can support these children. I just want to know what the plan is for this in the future.
We are have developed and continue to develop the training programme for staff. But we have some really skilled people right across Northumberland. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have the experience in a particular area, particularly if there's a specific special educational need that's there. But we do have that specialism somewhere in Northumberland. We've got, as an example, we've got some of our lead Senkos. Each partnership has a lead Senko, and beyond that, we have some of those are actually employed on a secondment basis to work directly with schools. So some of those lead Senkos are from some of our special schools, and some of them are from our mainstream schools, but clearly very experienced. And where we want that, where we recognise and have the communication with schools about, you know, what is the gaps in the provision that you've got, to communicate with us what the gaps are. It could be a training gap, it could be a finance gap. We do believe that it's our responsibility to fill that gap, or support the school to fill that gap. So that we are growing with the inclusive, both the inclusive culture of schools, but also with the very brass tacks specific skills and resources needed to deliver. That's an ongoing basis and will be continuing to ongo apace.
What are the, you know, so we've still got the 3-tier system in Prideaux.
Okay.
So the first schools do really well at supporting children with special needs, but then there's a bit of a breakdown, and I don't know what happens, but then people become in crisis because their children's needs aren't being met in middle school. So there needs to be a robust plan of how we can support children from first school to middle school to high school to keep them in special in mainstream schools if they've got special educational needs, because we don't have a provision in our area. So parents don't want to send their children to Blythe and Morbith for their children's needs to be met. So we need a better plan as to how we support these kids in transition, which I do see that you have got that in the report, but it needs to be a bit better.
I'm aware of cases in Prudhoe. I'm aware of both sides where transition has been very successful for learners with high level of need, and also for a different learner for different reasons the transition has not been successful. And I absolutely agree that a plan, and that both the home school and the receiving school need to be aware of what's coming and when it's coming and what the needs are as soon as humanly possible. I think there is some work being done currently in and around annual reviews for learners with an education and healthcare plan, where we're actually looking 2 and 3 years before phase change, not penning it in, but penciling in what is the next step for this learner, and how do we ensure that they're prepared for the next step and the receiving school is prepared for the learner. So one element in terms of annual review is specifically looking at that pathway. another example about how it's going to be improved already for this year. There's a date usually in the middle of February, which is when learners with special educational needs should know the school that they're attending the following September. Well, we've worked this year we should be in a position where all families and learners and schools should know before Christmas. Again, lengthening the period of time that we can do that transition work. And linked to the earlier identification of the probable journey for the young person earlier on, that as time goes by, people will know years in advance about what their cohorts are going to look like. There's some really good examples of that in the Berwick partnership. The Grove in Berwick and the head teacher there, I know it's slightly smaller scale to some of our other partnerships, but really knows the learners with SEND almost across all the schools, and is able to do two things. One, support the provision that's there at the moment, give advice and support and guidance and training, but also know what a likely timescale for when they might go to the Grove, or the sort of support that they might need through the middle school system there as it currently stands, which are very inclusive schools, and then on to their high school. And we've definitely got to make sure we don't lose that in the reorganisation in Berwick, but it is a good example of how, regardless of the system, the makeup of the schools, the way they're working together to support the learner and the staff in delivering for the learner.
Yeah, so that's great, but we've got to take into consideration those who haven't got an education healthcare plan, also who are in that transition.
Agree.
And finally, Mark Swinburne, I'll draw this to a close. Oh, and then I'll bring in Reverend Landis to finish this off.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David. So, a couple of things. Firstly, there's been mention of figures and percentages and how we're doing better than, you know, other areas and slightly better than you know, national targets. And from a data person, you know, that's what I do with my everyday job. It would be great if we're top of the pile, but it's not just about being there and waving a flag, because that translates to the fact that the better we can do, it's the individuals, it's the children and their future that we'd be providing a better service for. And I think it's important just to point that out, that it's not just about percentages and about numbers, it's about those individuals and the service that we'd be providing as an authority for those children, and about the betterment of their future. So, you know, just to point out, it's not numbers that we're going on about, it's individual children and the future that we can provide for them. So we're not just going, oh, we want to be, you know, the top of the pile. It's that service that we can provide. I just want to pick up on the comment on finances that people have made, and, you know, and the drop in numbers. Now, as a facts committee, we're well aware of these drop in numbers, and it's predominantly across the whole of the authority. And we've had reports, we have the report here on an annual basis, and how detailed that is and worked out across from our officers when, you know, applications are made for housing developers, etc., and all the schools, and how the parents' involvement, that sort of messes up the numbers now and again and things like that. And I wanted to point that out because when it comes to spaces, we're well aware that the public have this perception of, oh, there's a housing development coming along, we don't have enough space in schools, a couple of thousand houses. That doesn't mean a couple of thousand school places. It's a very small number. So when a developer says, oh, we're going to build a school, you know, to cope with these couple of thousand houses, they can't legally build a school unless it's a free school. And the number of child places that would come from a couple of thousand houses is so small that it wouldn't support a school. So it has to go in the mainstream school. And so following those small numbers, that would help to add to the numbers going into the mainstream schools. So with fallen numbers and the thought of how are we going to manage with those fallen numbers, I'm in no way supporting some of this development that comes along. It's just, you know, for the public there, don't be thinking that you need to build schools because they can't. It's just be wary of that. But I've got a couple of questions which I'd like to ask David if I can. One of them is just to clear up a bit of a public myth, which I know is out there. So it's special education needs. So it doesn't automatically mean that a child needs to be moved into a separate and specialist education setting. And the vast majority of cases, it just means some alteration required in their current setting to provide some additional help and support. Because I'm well aware that some people think, you know, and they might be very cautious of their child being, you know, going down the special education needs route because they could be taken out of school and put in some specialist setting, etc. Or there's that requirement. But in the majority of cases, it just means they're in the same school and it's just tailoring the support for that individual and away from the norm. So it's just to clear up that myth. That's the first one that I wanted to ask about.
The guidance to all schools is our ordinarily available provision guidance. And that guidance is about how to meet a range of needs within the classroom. Because inclusive schools have a proportion of learners with different needs within each and every classroom, and they need to meet all of those needs within the classroom. Absolutely, completely agree. And those, whether they're learners that are from a disadvantaged background or whether they're learners that have a special educational need, which is more moderate, possibly, that in the classroom with their peers is the place that they should be. Yes.
Great, thank you. So the other question, and it's been raised by some of my colleagues here, was about the ability to meet the needs of special education in the normal setting. Now, we've had various parts of this report come to the LAC already over the last months, but a question was raised at our LAC just a few weeks ago in Bedlington. It was raised by a member of the public, and it was about, as Angie said, about meeting that need in school. And the member of the public was concerned about how we were able to do that, and I was able to say that we're well aware, and we've got a task and finish group about special education needs, and we're well aware that that goalpost keeps expanding sort of out of our reach because of the numbers, as has been mentioned, keeps increasing year on year quite significantly. And we're doing as much as we can as an authority to try and meet that need. But the concern was raised, and I got a concern on this, that in an academy, it appears that it's easier for them to press them for home education and move them out of an academy to home education setting. Now, that's quite concerning to me because I'm thinking they might not be getting the best education that they could get within mainstream education. Do we have any way of monitoring numbers of those who may be moved from an education setting, whether it's in local authority or in academy? So a movement of those numbers into home education, and not just monitoring the numbers, but on a location setting and even down to an individual school to see if there's any particular trends, because I'd be very concerned to see if there's something happening in an area or in a particular school. So is there any way of monitoring that? Because I'd be very concerned.
Yes, there is a way of monitoring that. It is one of our metrics that we look from an inclusion perspective. So from an inclusion perspective, there are some headlines that are around suspensions and permanent exclusions, and we break those down by schools and areas to see what patterns there are and to see whether there is any maybe not intended policy, but some policies within those schools which lead to a particular outcome, rather than a different school with a different policy might not come to that particular outcome. We also look very closely at the attendance, and specifically at the minute I've got a quite sharp focus on schools where they have the number of learners at any particular school that attend for less than 50% of the time. So this is a really significant absence, but the reason for that it would be indicating that the provision of the school is not meeting the needs of that learner. So that's another sort of key metric that goes through. And mobility between schools we've actually broken that down not just to individual schools but to individual year groups to try and identify where, if there is, and those mobility factors will include anybody that goes to electively home educated, whether the parents elected or not, I think is possibly what you're getting at, that there's somehow the school have influenced that. But that would be, I wouldn't necessarily say that that was particularly an academy thing. Any school leader that ends up with figures which are very different to the norm, we do identify and we do challenge.
Great. I did ask the member of the public that if they had any specific information with regards to that, to pass it on, because they said, you know, it just seemed as though it was easier for the school to push that way than to deal with it there and then. But I did ask them to pass on any information, but thank you for that.
Thank you, Mark. And Reverend Lennox.
Just to say thank you for a comprehensive report. It's good to be able to read it through. Sometimes when you're the last to speak, you find that most of the questions you have already been covered in the previous speaker. I find it important in a report to see some statistical backup for all the observations that are made. And on the key figures on page 11, when you look at them, you see some very high percentages at the very beginning, the top, 93%, and improvements there, 96%, and then they seem to decline. And my question really basically is, overall, why do we see such a decline in age-related curriculum in schools, etc., secondary? Why can't we maintain the sort of figures that are there at the beginning? And the underlying thought I had in relation to this, based upon experiences, is the degree of absenteeism in schools. As children get older, there's a tendency just to not attend. And I wonder to what extent we analyse the reasons for absenteeism, particularly in this post-pandemic era, because of the increase in mental health, etc., and all those factors, and whether we're addressing that sort of key area of attendance. I just make that as an observation at the end. Thanks.
That's the core purpose of our educational welfare service. And again, just similar to Mark's point, or the response to Mark, in terms of we do have the metrics. We know by school, we know by year group, we know month in, month out on a daily basis, particularly with attendance. It's monitored. Each learner that drops below a certain percentage is, we have officers who attend the school, whatever type of school it is, to put into, to discuss with the school what the current plan is for supporting that young person to re-engage with school. The EWO service would, as a principle, always be minded to, yes, re-engage with school and increase attendance, but also in a way which doesn't trigger, there are some anxiety and legitimate mental health challenges for some young people. And that is something which is higher now than it was in the past. But a view to providing and developing with the school a curriculum which meets their needs and their aspirations, some of which might not be in the traditional school building. And I've hinted at that in one of the final bullet points there in the summary, which is looking at different pathways for Key Stage 4. So you're indicating about that drop in attendance for older young people, and that us developing some, not for all learners by any way, shape, or form, but for some of those learners where attendance is very low, and there may be a special educational need, or there might not be actually related to that, but is the curriculum that we're delivering one which is motivating them to attend? And we need to look at some different pathways, which will still include a strong academic core, absolutely needs to, because everybody needs that for their future life chances to be expanded, but also another flavour of vocational programmes, which again bring that might for some young people bring that motivation. Or again, it's the location. Actually, it is a very structured academic programme, but not one within the general makeup of 30 learners in a classroom that move to 6 different lessons each day and so on, so forth, which can be a barrier for some young people.
If I could just make a personal observation upon what you've just said, David, I think you're right, because I remember years ago going into a London comprehensive school to do some external examining in that school, to be met with the fact that a particular course was causing havoc because of the attendance rates. They were turning up just particularly for that course and for nothing else. So, you know, I think these are key factors in amongst why, you know, attendance is it is. And this whole aspect, the worrying aspect of mental health, you know, the increase in mental health, the awareness of mental health and the increase of it, and how we are addressing this in terms of absenteeism.
I think the point's well noted there. So I'm keen to make progress on this. So we've been asked to carry out four things this morning, which I think we've duly done, which is detailed scrutiny, some challenge, observations, and I think a lot of support for what has been done by the team over the last year. I'd like to put on record, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, our thanks to every single member of staff who makes this happen, both within the council, but also within our schools and support organisations. Everyone from the cleaners to the cooks to the teachers to the support staff to the heads, and also that army of childminders who are out there as well, doing a super job, often unsung heroes who are inextricably linked into our education system. So thank you very much. I think we've had a very good detailed report on that. So David, thank you for presenting that. If I can just quickly run on to two other items on the agenda this morning, the forward plan and the work programme. Chris, you'll quickly cover those off.
Thanks, Chair. The forward plan is mostly just to note there isn't anything that Cabinet have looked at that would necessarily come, since the last meeting, that would necessarily come to facts. The only thing really to note is that Cabinet will be considering the annual education report that we've just heard at its next meeting. The details of what Cabinet discuss will be covered in the forward plan at Fax's next sole meeting, which will be in March. On the work programme, just to point out that the meeting in January will be a joint meeting with the Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny to consider the joint health and wellbeing strategy refresh, which will look at the giving children and young people the best start in life, and the adults and children safeguarding annual report. So that'll be a joint meeting in January, and then FACS will meet on its own again in March.
And just for your diaries, that's on the 9th of January.
Yes, Tuesday the 9th.
Tuesday the 9th of January, which is good. So on that point, very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. It's the first time I've wished that to anybody this year, so that's good. I've got no urgent business, so thank you very much for your attendance this morning, and thanks to David for presenting as well. Thank you.